So I'm going to start with goats because goats are somehow there's some sort of love affair between homesteaders and goats, and I'm going to suggest that they are the hardest of all the homestead animals to raise. So I'm going to start there, and I'm going to go to the easier animals as we go through. But the thing about goats that you have to understand is that um, they are the hardest to control. And by that I mean there's an old saying, Cena, that if your fence won't hold water, it won't hold a goat. And and so that should tell you something about. I mean, the
So
goats are
practically
out.
no fence will work.
Yeah. I mean, the goats are out is pretty is one of the most common homestead phrases ever mentioned. The thing about a goat is that they are not grazers, they are browsers. So a grazer, which is like a sheep or a cow, a grazer wants to graze below their shoulders. They want to eat grass that down below their shoulders. A browser wants to eat above their shoulders. And actually, their their um, their saliva glands are actually different in the two different kind of animals. For example, a cow, when they're eating down low like that, their saliva is running into their into the food, and in fact, the saliva actually heals the end of the grass when they bite it off. There's a lot of indication that that is almost acts like a I don't know, like a salve for the injured plant where they've, bitten it off. And that's why a lot of times that's why generally grazed plants grow back a lot faster than mowed plants. Because in a mowing, you just, the lawnmower, it whacks the leaves off, whereas a cow jerks it off and leaves all this biology in her saliva, coating the end of that broken blade of grass.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful that they work together. Like
Yes.
he gets the food, the nutrients or the light,
Yeah.
but he
Yeah.
then heals it back.
Yeah. Very
So
much so.
that's
And,
amazing.
and so when a cow is eating up above its shoulders, the saliva doesn't run down as well. A goat does have that ability, and so they secrete that saliva. They have a much different. There's actually been studies showing the the ability of the lips of a goat. Like a cow has this big old muzzle, and they're fairly slow motion. Whereas a goat, you look at a goat, and I mean their lips are just going like a, like a house of fire the whole time. And their lips can come together what 100 times a minute, whereas a cow um, 10 times a minute. So anyway, the goat wants to be a browser. Now here's the thing: plants, brushy plants, bushy plants, their energy cycle, their energy flow is way more lethargic than the energy flow of forages. So forages are everything, grass, clover, weeds, just that are growing down in the ground, that they're succulent forages, as opposed to something that's woody, which goats love. Goats will practically, climb a tree to get to the leaves. And so goats love that above shoulder grazing. But the problem is that those plants, those woody type plants, have a much slower energy cycle. So when they get denuded, when they get pruned or eaten, the grow back time is 3 or 4 times faster, I mean, slower than forages. So a forage plant, you cut back a forage plant, and let's just say it is back to full, full grazable capacity in, let's just say, for example, 30 days. Um, Obviously, if you're in Nevada, it's whenever the rain comes. If that's a year, it's a year, but east of the Mississippi here we have more regular rainfall. So let's just say for sake of discussion, 30 days, assuming it's spring. Whereas a denuded bushy or brushy or woody plant, that grow back time wouldn't be until maybe 100 days. Okay, so you're three times as slow in the recuperation cycle, and that is why over time goats tend to kill their habitat. Goats love browse, but because its recuperation cycle is so much slower, they tend to kill the woody species, and then the grass comes. So if you've got an overgrown pasture with a bunch of honeysuckle and brambles and autumn olive and that sort of thing in it, nothing can improve that pasture like a goat, because they'll gradually kill. And normally it takes about 5 years for all that brush to be killed. And so, the thing about goats is that right when you start liking your goats, um, because now you figured out how to keep them in, you figured out how to, lead them around, move them around, and all that. It takes about 5 years to start liking your goats. They've just eaten themselves out of their habitat. So, this
Oh,
is the issue with goats, and why in other cultures around the world where goats are such a mainstay of the culture, you always find them as a subgroup to either cows or sheep. In other words, when you have a mixed herd, what we call a flurd, flock and herd, when you have a flurd like that, there's a because there's always some woody, junky stuff around. You don't mix them at identical numbers, like 100 goats and 100 sheep. You have like, you know, 20 goats and 80 sheep, for example, to have a flock of 100. Um, and so the goats tend to go to one thing and the sheep tend to go to something else, or the cows. Sheep and cows graze much more similarly. So goats are the hardest to control. So they challenge your fencing a lot, and you really need an extremely hot spark. I'm talking about something over 8,000 volts, and yeah, hot. And you need multiple wires. Normally at least three wires. Um, for electric fence. For a physical fence, yeah, you can use physical fence. Just remember though, I'm not even going into all the nuances. All these animals, everything that I'm going to talk about, you want to be able to move them. So you need portable control mechanisms. Now, there are other ways, other techniques that you can handle these goats to move them around. For example, I know a guy once that built a triangular. He only had 3 or 4 goats, which, on a homestead, it might be all that you have. And what he did was he made a triangle. It was about, 16 feet by 16 feet by 16 feet. So an equilateral triangle. And that way, out of like cattle panel, that he strengthened with just a couple light boards on the side so it wouldn't noodle and wobble around, but it was light enough that he could pivot it. Because it was a triangle, he could grab any side and pivot it on one point, so he could literally go around a circle like a pie. And when you finish that circle, then you could use a different pivot point, create a new, and make another. And that way the goats were always in a physical physical barrier, but you could move it over your brush and your kind of brambles and devil shoestring and the things that you were trying to deal with. Um, it would get problematic if you were in a bunch of trees, a bunch of sapling. Then it'd be hard to rotate your thing, or rotate your triangle around. So there are lots of techniques. We actually made and this would work for goats, work for anything, but I'm putting it in the goat thing just because I think it has some possibilities. We actually made a wheeled box out of just light wood and put caster wheels underneath it, rubberized roller wheels, 10-inch wheels, and moved it around. We used it for a ram for our sheep. We called it the Rambler. And he could actually move it around by himself. He could actually, push up against the side, pushing for grass on the outside. Now it would have to be modified for goats, because goats would definitely have crawled out underneath or climbed out over the top. But
this sounds like a lot of work.
yes, it is. It is. Goats are so mischievous. They have just they're very inquisitive, and controlling them is a real issue. Here's the other thing that I'll say from a homestead standpoint. If you don't like the meat from this, I mean, why are you raising goats? You either milk them or you eat the meat. If you don't like goat's milk, or you don't like chevon, which is what we call goat meat, don't go through the hassle of getting a goat. On a homestead, you want an animal that you like. If you like eggs, then have chickens. If you like chicken, have chickens. If you like lamb, you can have sheep. But don't complicate your homestead situation by saying, "Oh, I saw this cute picture," and the next thing you're bringing home an animal that you don't even have a dietary affinity for, just because it's cute.
It could be your pet, but
Oh
that's
yeah,
kind of a high maintenance.
if you want a pet,
A high maintenance pet.
get a cat or a dog.
Done.
Cats even shoot. If you want that, just get a gerbil. Uh, that's a lot lower maintenance, or a
Yeah.
rabbit.
Yeah. Well, wait, Joel, you said that, the goat it take 5 years to really like this goat, and he might eat all his food by that point. So what if then at the end of 5 years, you really still like the goat? How do you get more food?
Yeah.
What, are you just planting a bunch more stuff?
No. So typically what happens is, by that time, you're comfortable with them, and you start a rent-a-goat program. So you got neighbors, that have brush and, places they want to clean up. And so you start, moving on to the neighbors, and that's how you do it.
That's funny. It's like sending them off for a play date. Like they're your kids.
Yeah,
Go play. I'll come back at dark and get you.
yeah, that's right. You just have to realize that if you turn your goats, here's what typically happens. That's a great question, Sina. What typically happens is, in 5 years, your fields are now pretty. The goats have eliminated the junk and everything, and your fields are now pretty, got nice grass, and you turn the goats into grazers. And when you do, it's too rich. It's too rich a diet. So then you get mastitis, you get sore hoof problems, because they got way too much protein. You get prolapses in birth. All sorts of issues, because the diet is just way too rich.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the issue. Or I mean, the other thing that you can do is, obviously, you can cut and carry. You can go with a machete, or a little electric chainsaw, and you can whack off, branches and leaves, and you can start working in your woods to prune your woods, and you can cut and carry. You can bring stuff to the goats and put in some sort of a hanging manger or feeder or something, and the goats can get their browse, what they would be browsing that's maybe beyond their reach or in an area that you don't want the goats in, and you can bring it to them and cut and carry. And that can certainly be done. Again, that's a significant amount of effort.
Yeah, I say that just sounds like too much work.
Yeah,
I'm ready for the next animal that you have to offer.
Friends, want to dive deeper into our thought-provoking conversations? Become part of the Beyond Labels family today by joining below. For any gift amount, you'll get access to the full, uncut episodes.
Every contribution, whether big or small, keeps this podcast going.
So join us and expand your Beyond Labels experience. Thank you.